But a lot of times when I first think of, I'll have conversations in my head. I sound like a crazy person. I hear voices.
It's May. Welcome back to another video. This is going to be book writing episode number 5, and we have a special guest today.
Hi, I'm Gillian, her old roommate.
Yes, in case you guys did not remember. So yeah, she's also a creative writing major, and I just came up with some questions and discussion points to talk about. Informal interview. So how long have you been writing, and how and why did you start writing?
I've been writing since I was a kid, definitely. I had to write a lot in school. It was part of our my elementary school that we had to write short stories in our English classes, and I enjoyed doing it and just kept doing it and kind of branched off from that probably in middle school to starting some plot lines for novels, and then took it from there.
And what genres of books do you like writing?
I primarily like reading and writing historical fiction because I'm a big history buff. I also love reading mysteries and thrillers, but I have not yet developed my craft to the point where I can write them. But I hope to someday be able to write some mysteries and thrillers. I love combinations of genres, so I've read historical thrillers and historical mysteries, which are some of my favorites. And then I love some of the classics. My favorite book is Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. So I like to incorporate kind of some of the aspects of classic novels and classic writers into my historical fiction. And then when I'm writing present, I'm usually writing literary fiction where it's character-based.
What does the writing process look like for you? So how do you get an idea for a novel and develop it? Because I always think this is really interesting. Because I was telling my vlog the other day that like it starts out with like images. Usually like when I'm listening to music, I'll just like get like images of like people.
So you're like seeing it as a movie first.
Yes.
Always. Okay, that's super interesting to me because when I first come up with a character, I'll give you the two ways. One is I have a Pinterest board that I save all my inspiration onto, so I'll see an image that I think is intriguing, and then if there's a day where I want to write something but I don't know what to work on, I'll just go through that board and see which of the images. It'll take me going through 100 images to find one that's going to stand out to me enough for me to start a character or a story. But a lot of times when I first think of, I'll have conversations in my head. I sound like a crazy person. I hear voices. But I have conversations that I just come up with a really clever line, and I start to develop the personality of that character, and then what they look like is really an afterthought. What they look like is based on their personality. I try to give them physical features that reflect the personality I've crafted for them. So I definitely start with characters and conversations, and plot always comes last. I don't think I've ever started a project where I've had the plot in my head first and then developed the characters around it.
Yeah, no, that's the same for me. Sometimes it will start out with the conversation. Most of the time it's like the movie and the images, but even with that, like the characters' looks aren't that clear. It's just like what's happening in general, and like it's always when I'm listening to music when I come up with it. But then sometimes I'll come up with like little lines of conversation or something.
I think another thing too is settings. Sometimes I know I want to set a book in a certain era in history or in a certain place, whether it's a country or a city or a state, or small town versus big city. So a lot of times I'll start with location too, and then figure out which characters will kind of fit in that location.
I think setting comes after for me too. Like, I never come up with that first.
Okay.
It's just like, where am I going to put these characters?
And I have that too, where I'll come up with a character, especially with historical fiction, and say what period in history would best serve this character's story.
Yeah.
And usually I end up picking the same eras because they're ones that I know well, but I'm trying to branch off. I'm doing an 80s one right now, which I haven't attempted yet.
It's really good. Where were we? What is your opinion on the balance between writing from experience versus doing research? So I did a video on this a while ago. If you haven't seen it, it's called Should You Write From Experience, where I kind of talk about like how much of your own experience should you put into your writing. Is it like inauthentic to write about something you've never experienced? Like, how do you strike that balance? So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I come off as a very outgoing person, but I am a very closed off person. So I really don't like putting myself into my writing. So when it comes to writing from experience, I'm writing from things that I've heard from other people or places that I've been, but not necessarily my experience in that place. Because for me, I'm trying to, I think it also comes, I did theater all growing up, and for me, it's kind of like my experience on stage was never about me, so it's like, I wasn't going to get emotional while I was on stage if it was my last performance, with my friends, because I'm saying my duty is to the audience, and I feel like that's blended into my writing a little bit, where I say I don't want to put too much of my personal emotions in it, because my job is to craft a story that will allow the readers to experience their own emotions. And I think I kind of have this fear that if I put too many of my emotions into it, I'm projecting those onto the reader rather than letting them come up with their own emotions. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So for me, I really like to do a lot of research, especially with historical fiction, because it's necessary, but do a lot of research about other types of people. I have one younger brother. I don't have any older siblings. I don't come from a big family. I'm not an only child. So part of my research is talking to people whose life experiences are different than mine, who maybe only grew up with one parent or grew up in a big city. I grew up in a small one, and kind of learn from them in that way and try to incorporate that in there. All of the attempts that I have done about putting myself into the story have never worked out well. So eventually I'll get there. But for now, I feel most comfortable writing things outside of myself. And there are books that I'm probably 100 pages into writing, and there's really not any of me in that story or any of my experiences. And it's purely the personalities and experiences of people I know. And that works for me, but for a lot of people, I think that's really challenging.
I don't think I could do that. Yeah, I feel like in all of my books, here's the way I describe it. I never write a book that's like, this character is supposed to be me, but it's like, I create like a completely different character and like a completely different life, but like the emotional core of whatever I was going through as I wrote it is there. And that's how Cooper, my short story professor, he said that that's how it worked for him too when he's writing short stories. Like, so it's like, it's not my story, but like the heart of it is my story.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like for all my books that's true.
Because, I mean, I think that's the main thing, and I've heard that from a lot of people that give advice on creative writing. You have to be passionate about what you're writing about, or it's going to come across as really boring. You could have a really interesting plot and have a writer who does not care about the plot write it, and it's going to be a lackluster story. There's going to be something missing, because you have to have that element of passion behind the writing. It's kind of like you as the reader are wanting to read something saying, why should I be reading this? And that really needs to be the answer that the writer is coming up with. They need to answer the question, why am I writing this? And if you can't answer that question, I think you need to make some changes to your project. Because that's happened a lot where I've been really passionate about a story and have had to make a big change very often. Let's say it's a workshop thing where I brought it into a short story workshop and they said this major part of your story needs to be changed. And I said, well, if I have to change that part of the story, I don't even want to write it anymore, because it's kind of, that's what mattered to me. And now that that part's gone, I have no attachment to the story anymore.
Yeah, because you do like doing research. You like doing
I love
research. Hate doing research. I try to minimize the amount of research.
I have like bookmarks on my computer where it's like most popular cakes of the 1930s, because I like needed my character to have a birthday cake, and I'm like, I don't want it to be like something that they didn't have in the 30s. So I looked up, and there were rations going on during the World War II. So if I'm doing a story in the 40s, I need to know like, okay, what's a realistic thing for them to be making for this celebration, or like what was Christmas like at that time, because it was different than it was before and after the war. So I love doing that, and that's part of the reason why I love reading both historical fiction and historical nonfiction, because it allows me to kind of come up with new storylines. And I'll read something and say, oh, I want to put that into my story. That's really cool. Or, oh, that's awesome, but I wonder if someone has that same experience in this other era that I'm putting my story in.
Yeah. What is your ideal writing environment?
I need natural light to write. So writing in like the basements of libraries and stuff like that, I get no work done. And so that's what makes it really interesting for me. I either need natural light, or I need to be sitting in my bed under my Spider-Man blanket with my laptop at 2 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, that's been my last 3 years. But so yeah, for me, it's like I just need comfortable experiences. I do not get good writing done sitting at a desk. Like if I need to just read through and proofread, fine, I can sit at my desk or, in a library chair and do it. But it's like I need to kind of be in a place that's so comfortable that the world around me disappears. And another thing is I don't necessarily like writing in complete silence unless, again, I'm in like my own little space where I'm comfortable. But I like writing in like coffee shops where it's noisy enough that I can't understand people's conversations.
That is prime.
But I don't want to write in places where I can hear a pin drop because that's really distracting. So it's kind of hard finding that balance. Another thing is I've really tried writing outdoors. I really want to get into it. My laptop battery is terrible, so it hasn't been very successful yet. I feel like locations can be really moving if you're sitting at the beach or sitting in a park or something that's really pretty, or you have some type of emotional attachment to. I think that can kind of give you a new perspective, because I find when I'm sitting in the comfort of my bedroom in my normal writing space, I'm still in the mindset that I always am there. And if I'm struggling with a scene and I go take my computer outside, I kind of get a different perspective on the scene just because I've changed my environment. I know that sounds weird, but that kind of works for me.
Yeah. For me, like, I think the prime writing environment would be in a coffee shop, like you said, where you can hear noise, but it's not so much that you can actually understand and trace someone's conversation.
Yeah.
And I have headphones in with music, but I'm not really listening to the music. It's just become background noise too, because I'm so laser focused on what I'm writing. It's just so hard to get into that zone. Like, it takes so long.
I can't write with music with lyrics. It has to be jazz or classical music, which I love.
Because sometimes I'll find a song that like fits really well with my book, like I did last night, and then I was just like writing to that song on repeat, and I was like, but yeah.
I'm also someone who can't listen to songs on repeat. I go crazy.
I always listen to songs. You know, that's actually a Spotify hack. Or you have premium, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't give you ads if you listen to a song.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Life hack for y'all. Okay, anyway. I wanted to talk about sequels and trilogies and series, because I was writing my main book, the one that I'm using for class. I was planning on having a sequel to it, and we recently discussed it and have pretty much decided that there is actually not going to be a sequel, because it's like no one cares about sequels. They're just like this afterthought where the plot usually just repeats itself. So, yeah.
I mean, I'm really not a fan of sequels and trilogies. I think there are a few exceptions, especially in films, where there's been kind of this anomaly where the second film has been so different from the first that I think it's been really successful. But I prefer those authors that if they truly want to write in the similar vein, then they will write similar stories that have the same feel, but they will have maybe some intertwined characters. Let's say it all takes place in a small town. So there's one scene where two characters run into each other in a coffee shop and one was from a previous book, something like that. If you're wanting to write something that is a little more coherent like that and kind of make sense together, I think that writing stories with similar themes and similar moods is a good way to do it. But I think a lot of times if you're trying to write the sequel, there's this challenge of my character's already gone on this arc in the first novel, so do I backtrack? Because a lot of times they'll do that, where I see it a lot when they make sequels to films. It's like the character will be in a relationship with the guy that she's been chasing the whole movie, and then the movie will start out, the sequel will start out, and the guy is nowhere to be seen. And I feel like it's kind of like, well, what was the whole point of that first movie then?
Right.
Like, why did I watch that first movie if now you're just telling me that doesn't exist anymore? So for me, I think that the sequel has to be an advancement of the storyline. And so that's where, for me, if you want to write a successful sequel or trilogy, the only way that I can think of doing it in my own writing is if I have it planned out from the beginning. If I know, okay, this will be a 3-book series, this is my end goal, and this is what I'm working towards, and I can make some detours and changes along the way. But knowing in the end, because I feel like if I were to just blindly start writing something and say, maybe there will be a sequel, I would really run into that problem of either backtracking or just rehashing what I went through in the first one.
Yeah, you want to have one arc that goes across.
Yeah, exactly.
I was planning on having a sequel, but now I have to change stuff. But it's really not that much, actually. I just need to, cut out one scene. But I have to actually edit the
Another thing that I have seen done that does work fairly well if you're trying to do a trilogy is having it's more the epic format, epic in the classical sense, where there's 3 books and they all work to a final arc, but they are each based on a different character. So we'll follow one character in the first one, and then all the same characters will appear in the second one. We'll just be following a different character. Okay. And I've seen that work really well because then each book has its own arc in the sense that there's a character arc in each book, but there's also the overall arc. And I think that a lot of times the conflict is based on the character. It's kind of like each character is going to have their own type of conflict. So you're not going to be running into the problem of having the same conflict each time. Yeah. Versus like if I'm somebody who's constantly late and I'm a character in something, I'm probably going to be late in every single book, and that's going to get pretty boring. Yeah. But what is a conflict for me may be very easy for someone else, and vice versa.
That would be me. The character that's always late. Yeah, the Anna and the French Kiss, Love More Next Door, Isla and the Happily Ever After. Have you heard of those? Mm-mm. Yeah, that's like a trilogy where the characters appear in the other ones, but it follows a different character in each one. But the first one was still the best. I feel like that's always true. Like, most of the time. Like, 99% of the time. Like, all the sequels I read, like, If I Stay, the sequel was Where She Went, was very whatever compared to the first book. Dang, why didn't even bother reading the sequel to Every Day? Because it's like, you should have just left it there. Like, why try to complicate this more? Every Day had another book, I think called Another Day, that was like the same story told from Rhiannon's point of view. But then there's actually a sequel, and I forgot the name of it, but it's like actually continuing, and it's like, no, like the end was so perfect. Why would you ruin it like that? And the same thing with Me Before You. The sequel was After You, and it's like, no. It's just not a good idea. So anyway.
Well, my answer to why the first one is better, I think it completely depends on your genre. This is really obviously seen in films, because when you look at action stories, things that are supposed to be thrillers or like I'm thinking things that are sci-fi and fantasy and things like that where you're trying to have an intense, thrilling storyline. Very often people will say that the middle book of the trilogy is the best one. And they feel like, or the final book of the trilogy, or, you know, TV, movie, series, or whatever. Because that's finally the point where we're done setting up for the plot and we can finally get to the action.
That's true.
So if that's your genre, I think that what you need to work on is the balance of character development and plot points in all three books to really even it out. I think that if you're writing character-based stuff or dramas, the first one tends to be better because that's the book where, or the movie where you're really putting in the emotional investment of trying to lay out the storyline, establish the characters, establish the setting. And if you're writing a drama, a romance, even a comedy, something like that, that's what people are looking for. So I think you really need to look at what your genre is that you're trying to cater to. That's really the problem with a lot of historical fiction, is a lot of people find the first books very slow because there's so much development that has to go into it. Other people really like the first book because they're reading historical fiction purely for the development of the era. They don't really care about the plot point of the characters. So I think it depends on your reader and it depends on your genre.
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna end here. Right. See you later. Okay, so yesterday I became absolutely obsessed with the song when I was like doing like a Spotify deep dive at 1 a.m. while I was working on homework. Oh my god, like the song is beyond amazing, and it is so like absolutely perfect for my spring break book. I guess that's what we'll call it. The one that I've been working on since spring break, and I am deeply attached to it.
When you hold me in the street and you kiss me on the dance floor, I wish that it could be like that. Why can't it be like that? 'Cause you keep behind closed doors. Every time I see you, I die a little more. So the moments that we steal as the curtain falls, it'll never be enough.
I will be writing this book to that song on repeat forever.
I can't
Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please leave a like and a comment and subscribe, and I will see you next time. I make videos every Monday and Thursday. Bye!